Now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Brad Romine, who will introduce the panel.
Okay, thank you, Heather. I'd like to welcome our panelists to come up here, if they would, please, and we'll get started. Folks, if you need a cup of coffee or a cup of iced tea, now would be a good time to do it. Just ask you to find your seats real quickly while we transition here. Hey, Jared.
You know, I got set up. We'll do. How you doing?
By the way, that's I think it's all my favorite. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we have some buffer, but yeah. Because you told me yeah, a little tutorial.
So
Hold it. Yeah. It'll stay on.
just like a temporary.
Right. So keep it on.
the red means.
And for the opening remarks, folks are going to go in this order. Okay, is that all right? That's what we have. You're not using slides. We'll have Michael, Matt. You're not using slides. You're welcome to do it from here with that, or you come up to the podium, whichever you prefer. And then, Jared, we have your slides loaded on here after they go. Come up to the podium, run your slides from here. And then, yeah. Malia, you are last but certainly not least in the opening, and then we'll get into some Q&A with me in the audience. Oh, I haven't seen anybody.
I was gonna give. Yeah, right. I was gonna give 3 seats. And I haven't said that. Talk about sometimes we'll get creative solutions.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, meal too hot?
Up to you. Up to you. Stay like it is.
It's the end of the day. We should like.
Yeah. I gotta grab one thing. It's
all right.
Okay, folks, we're going to get started again. Please go ahead and find your seats. All right, I have the honor and the pleasure of moderating our final, last but not least, panel discussion of natural and cultural resource stewards and decision makers on working to integrate scientific and local and traditional ecological knowledge in sea level rise adaptation here in Hawaii. So they're each going to have some brief intro remarks, and then we'll get into a series of questions. I have a few prepared ones, but we certainly will be looking for some questions from our audience too. So there'll be some time for that. So with that, I'd like to first introduce Michael Cain, who is the administrator of the State of Hawaii Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands. Michael earned his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Michigan, a master's degree in urban and regional planning from University of Hawaii here in 2004. He's been a planner with the Department of Land and Natural Resources since 2005. In June 2022, we were all really pleased to see him selected as the new administrator of the DLNR Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands, or OCCL. He's also worked on planning projects in American Samoa and Guam, Prior to joining the planning field, he served as a public health worker with the Peace Corps in Chuuk, Micronesia, and worked in the crisis intervention field in both Michigan and Hawaii. Thank you for being here, Michael, and welcome your opening remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Aloha, everybody. So the Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands is primarily a regulatory agency with jurisdiction on any lands in the state that are zoned conservation. That includes coastal lands, which means we have found ourselves on the front lines of having to make really difficult decisions on how to adapt to climate change and to rising seas. And most of my intro will be focusing on the regulatory aspects, but we also do manage the beach fund that promotes restoration projects across the state. And we house the Climate Commission within OCCL. And we're still in a daze over the governor's announcement yesterday. So if I'm in a daze, I've spent the morning, grappling with that was great news, but no, we had heard a rumor, said, hey, Leigh got 100 million. I was like, no, she did not. Then I opened my emails. So there we go. What I'd like to do is give you 3, maybe 4 scenarios where we've used science in our decision-making and that have led to different outcomes or had different repercussions. I want to start with the cultural one. We work a lot with local practitioners dealing with local ia restoration. That's the traditional Hawaiian fish pond systems. And about 10 years ago, we were approached that the issue that practitioners were having a difficult time navigating the bureaucracy to secure their permits. We dug into it. We discovered that they needed 17 different federal and state permits to fix a fish pond wall. So we met with the practitioners, gained a better understanding of their practices, what they intended to do. We met with other government agencies who all agreed we needed to streamline the process. Unfortunately, all their ideas for streamlining were to add 10 more regulations each. And we also had a science roundtable where we gathered everybody who's doing research with fish ponds in one room and just went around the table and shared research. And what we found was that the scientific research matched up with traditional practices. So when we went forward with our environmental assessments, a statewide environmental assessment, we were able to show that these traditional practices matched the science our scientific understanding of how the environment works. And it also gave us tools to push through the bureaucracy and modify a few state laws, because it turned out if science and culture are on the same page, we can change the law as needed. So that's one place where, and to tie it into climate change, one thing we heard was that we needed to respect Hawaiian ingenuity, that Hawaiians would have adapted to a changing climate. They would not have felt trapped into just doing what they did in 1830 or 1870. And so we did build that into the program and allowed people to adapt their seawalls, their fish ponds to a changing climate. So that's my success story. That's where science and culture came together and helped us address issues we're facing with climate change. Scenario 2, we know that shoreline hardening will protect solid land and damage public resources, makai of the wall. We've known that for decades, but over the past couple of years, we have more concrete studies that show this is the choice we make. If we harden the shoreline, we protect property, we damage our trust resources. 2 years ago, the state of Hawaii made a state policy to prohibit shoreline hardening to protect private structures. And in that case, the science has allowed our office and DLNR to take a much harder stand in holding the line on shoreline hardening. That means that our politicians are going to have to make some very tough choices. And so that's a case where we feel we're solid in the science. We know we have to make this choice. Do we protect the beach? Do we protect private land? We know where we stand. And the science has allowed us to really stand firm, because there is a lot of pressure to save homes, resorts, et cetera, that are currently, people keep showing the picture of them falling in. So you know the situation we face. Third one's a little bit different. Obviously, we're all looking for alternative solutions. There are some times where we might have to harden the shoreline, such as to protect the highway, where there's nowhere for a highway to move. And people, we want to be open to new approaches. And about once a week, I'll get a phone call or an email from somebody who has a creative solution to solve all of our problems. And just having a science background and knowing how the scientific method works allows us to differentiate between what a peer-reviewed study is and what a YouTube video is. I need to share that knowledge with some of the other state agencies, perhaps. And with that, I will pass it on.
Is this not on? Okay, it's on again. All right, thank you. Since January 2021, Matt has served as the City and County of Honolulu Chief Resilience Officer and Executive Director of the city's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. He joined the city and the Resilience Office in October 2017 and previously served as Coastal and Water Program Manager in that office. Prior to joining the city, Matthew served as the Community Planning and Design Extension Agent with the University of Hawaiʻi Sea Grant College Program. Welcome, Matt. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Brad. Aloha, everyone. First off, I just wanted to acknowledge the current Coastal and Water Program Manager and our adaptation team, as we like to call them, at the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. We have Alex Yee, Haley Campbell, who participated in a panel earlier today, Elin Wolf, and Sophia Summers. So if you have any actual questions, they can help you later. We have a slightly different story, and the handoff from Michael was not like, it wasn't a rib that we're the ones that need to stop watching YouTube videos.
No.
So we're a partner in a lot of this work, but we're not a regulatory agency. We're a young government office. The voters established the City and County Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency only in 2016. We're 5-6 years young at this point. And especially in relation to this topic of environmental, cultural, historical resources, the city, frankly, just hasn't had a very active role or a position of being that kind of a resource manager or a thinker on the resources. And we depend upon great partnerships with state agencies, federal agencies, nonprofit agencies, and frankly, community leaders. So some of these opening comments are just a little bit more general, and I hope the questions we can get into it a little bit more. But obviously on the topic of sea level rise, it's just generally overwhelming, an overwhelming sense of loss, the truth and reality of the horizon and the trajectory that we have in front of us. And obviously that can breed a lot of despair. And the hope comes from these forums. We benefited from a super secret peer exchange down below in the basement of this building earlier this morning, which really, quite frankly, is a chance to commiserate in all of the work. The people that are grappling with this across the state and in the counties are just so earnest and thoughtful in their awareness of the impacts, the people in place, the environment of those places, and frankly, like our ability to thrive as island communities. And oftentimes, this government position can be perceived as a position of power, but we're only empowered by the rules that we're allowed to govern with. Like the good things don't just happen because we want them to. There's so much inertia in systems, sort of how we have approached things historically, as Michael mentioned, coming to grips with this state agency that now is the front line of a very tricky shoreline regulatory process. Doesn't immediately position ourselves for the solutions that we know are needed. And same thing for elected officials. You know, they're empowered by constituents or hopefully scientists putting their necks out there. We're so appreciative of former chair and folks like Chip Fletcher with our Honolulu City Climate Change Commission. We're so appreciative of the university and the Sea Grant program, even allowing another Sea Grant extension agent to put himself out there as an individual. Brad Romine, now currently serving on the Climate Change Commission, because it's risky to put ourselves out there to engage in these difficult discussions. But whether it's a planner working within the system that they have or an elected official trying to make a decision, they're just people at the end of the day, and they require courage, and that courage comes from support and continuously engaging them in these difficult topics. Because certainly as local government, we have to think about our own assets, the infrastructure that we have, and the services that we can provide to community. And again, some of these environmental, natural and cultural resources will be impacted, certainly as we saw from Phil's presentation just before this panel. And that can be difficult for the science community, I think, not because you all don't care, but it's potentially limiting to be the neutral broker of information when you know someone has to take that leap and that next step. So if nothing else, be a very persistent and relentless neutral broker of that information to help people understand what the truth and reality is. So what we're currently doing within CCSR is really working across all of the agencies. We're currently endeavoring on a climate adaptation strategy, which is not a defined plan that needs to happen through ordinance or statute. It's really this recognition that, you know, we can see what's on the horizon. We know there's different climate threats, different risks, different impacts, sea level rise obviously being one of them. What are the ways that we can incorporate that awareness, those parameters for how we have to think about, again, providing services to community into the future, into some of our day-to-day work, while also finding ways to celebrate and uplift all of the community climate leadership that already is happening, right? Cultural and environmental restoration is climate change adaptation. Whatever we can do to better manage the land and advance environmental planning will help us be more robust for the changes that are coming as a result of climate change. But don't want to gloss over how difficult it will be and the changes and the impacts that are in front of us, but that's the truth and reality that we're hoping to ensure that the city is clear-eyed, open, and honest about this, and speaking it regularly and frequently, and engaging community in these questions. And some of the essential questions that we have are grouped into two categories. Where are we going? You know, what is the value of a vision? This morning, we were talking a lot about the structure of plans and how we do plans and the shortcomings of those plans. But with the climate change science, we know where we're going. We have an actual vision of what's over the horizon. So what is our vision to not just prepare for the worst, but to hopefully improve upon some of these environmental and community conditions? Who gets to determine that vision? Is consensus possible? They teach us in facilitation training that consensus isn't even what you're necessarily going for when you're trying to manage a group. And what is fair? And then on the how do we get there side, some of the questions that we continue to ask ourselves, and when we're out talking with the community is, you know, how do we transition from this near-term thinking? There's so many things that are just right in front of our nose that we know are critical for community members. And we need to make sure that whatever we're talking about in terms of long-term challenges still resonate with folks today and some of their own hopes and aspirations. So how do we transition from near to long-term needs? What planning takes place at what scale? This goes back to a question we had with planning colleagues across the counties this morning. Again, we're required to do these plans, but are they actually serving the needs that we know we have challenges with? And then what tools do we need, let alone what do we have? And I used to work at the university, and obviously everyone says we need more data, and that's true. And we can get more refined tools like Tara spoke about. But for anyone that says we can't act upon information that we have now, it's because they don't actually want to take any action or do change. So we're grappling with that as well. There's so much with climate change that can just paralyze us to inaction that we really need to break down this sense that, oh, we're still uncertain in terms of what some of the challenges are. But certainly for resource managers, rules, regulations, permitting, it's helpful to have the most specific thing, but we make decisions all the time without great certainty in a lot of the things that we're doing. So I'm happy to talk more about that in the subsequent questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. All right. I want to welcome our next panelist, Dr. Jared Underwood. Dr. Underwood is the superintendent of the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument and with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Good, I'll use this. Okay. Feedback going here. Okay, Dr. Underwood is with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. As I mentioned, with the Marine National Monument, he earned his BS and MS degrees in conservation biology from Brigham Young University, and then completed a PhD at Arizona State University, also in conservation biology. After graduating, Jared worked in the conservation field in both Arizona and California for several years before returning to Hawaii. He currently resides in Kailua, Oahu. So welcome, Jared. You want to come up here to the podium and drive your slides? We could please get the podium mic going again for Jared. Thank you.
Or I can just take the hand one if that's okay. I also am probably too high above the microphone.
That sounds good.
Okay, so a lot of what we've been talking about, at least in the sea level rise discussion, has been impacts on infrastructure. And I think that was the point of this panel, is to also think about the impacts to natural and cultural resources. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the marine national monuments that are a part of Hawaii and also part of the trust resources for all Americans and others. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, which is the 1,500 miles north and west of the main Hawaiian Islands that consists mostly of small islands and atolls, which are really at risk of sea level impacts from sea level rise. So I'm going to show you some beautiful pictures. How's that? Instead of depressing ones. So some of the biological resources that use Papahanaumokuakea are seabirds. Now these birds might range 1,000 miles over the ocean looking for food, but they come to these tiny little specks of sand in the middle of the ocean, and that's where they nest and raise their young. We also have animals that are endemic only here to Hawaii, like the Hawaiian monk seal, which use primarily the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, Papahanaumokuakea, for breeding and raising their young and living. And lastly, the green sea turtle, which we now frequently see around here, almost 90% of them go to Papahanaumokuakea in order to nest. So all the turtles, most of the turtles we see around here will travel up to these, again, these small low-lying atolls and their associated islands to nest. So an example of what is happening and has happened can be seen here on East Island from Lalo, or French frigate shoals. So in 2018, in this picture here in the, what would that be? My right, your left, maybe? You can see the extent of the island in 2018. So in September, Hurricane Walaka hit and basically removed the island from existence. So in the picture below, you can see that there basically is no more island. Now this island was where most of the green sea turtles historically have gone to nest over the past several decades. Again, for all of the Hawaiian archipelago. Since then, it has come back some, but it hasn't come back high enough yet that, so now it's almost a trap for the sea turtles. They will lay their eggs on there, but then because the island gets overwashed or inundated with salt water, it actually, their nests are failing by and large. So these are some of the challenges that we're facing in Papahanaumokuakea and in the other marine national monuments, is not just impacts along the shoreline, but loss of entire islands. So one of the things that we've been doing, not alone, but with many partners, is trying to take those biological resources and help them to adapt to sea level rise. So for the past about, I think it's almost been 10 years now, we've been working with partners like Pacific Rim Conservation to take birds from these low-lying atolls that are not necessarily, some are found here in the main Hawaiian Islands and were historically found in the main Hawaiian Islands, but have very limited populations now, and move them to the high islands here where they can, when their islands disappear in Papahanaumokuakea, there'll still be a place for these species within Hawaii. So you can see here some albatross, and that was one of the first species we translocated. We've also been translocating smaller petrels and shearwaters, and those are burrowing birds, and you'll see the burrows there. And the picture here is from James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge, which is in Kahuku on the north shore of Oahu, where again, with partners, we've built a predator-proof fence, because one of the reasons why these seabirds have had a hard time continuing to exist here in the main Hawaiian Islands is cats, rats, mongoose, dogs, sometimes people. So in protecting these areas, we're able to give them a safe place to nest. So these birds were translocated as eggs or as chicks, and then they imprint on that area and they come back after when they're ready to breed in 3 to 5 years. So at sea level rise, the risks of these washover events, like we saw with Hurricane Walaka, put wildlife habitat, the limited infrastructure we have out there, such as this airfield on Midway, and potentially staff at risk. So what we're beginning to ask ourselves is, are the projects we're doing worth it? So we've actually, as we propose new projects, we're considering what is the risk that this island or this place is going to disappear in the next 20 or 30 or 50 years. And then we're weighing that with doing a project on maybe an island that has higher elevation, or that is larger, that's not going to get washed over, erode. And these are sometimes difficult decisions, but we are choosing to incorporate now, even in the absence of data, a lot of data on how the islands will be impacted. We are choosing to make those decisions. So what do we need? Well, there's great, as you've seen so far, there's great modeling for the main Hawaiian Islands and for places where people live. For Papahanaumokuakea, there is some, but for some of the other marine national monuments that we manage, there is very limited modeling on what's going to happen with sea level rise. So again, we don't necessarily need to understand every impact, like which house is going to be impacted, but we just need to understand the timeframes for when things are going to disappear. We also need to identify more refuges for these low island species that live in these marine national monuments that are found nowhere else, and how can we continue the existence of these species? How can we help them to adapt to sea level rise? And what we really need is people like you all to come up with innovative ideas to help us adapt to these islands, adapt these islands and the species that live on them to sea level rise. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jared. All right, it's my pleasure now to introduce Malia Nobrega-Olivera. Maria is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Community Engagement at the Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge. Malia was born and raised in Hanapepe Valley, Kona, Kauai. Malia is a native Hawaiian educator, a kumuhula, a salt maker, an event strategist, an advocate of Indigenous rights at all levels, locally, regionally, and internationally. Her experiences demonstrate her commitment to her people, language, and culture, and to Indigenous peoples worldwide. Malia's advocacy work has taken her to various international meetings, and currently she serves as the Pacific representative on the Global Steering Committee for the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Malia is also the co-founder of Kilo Malama, which supports the revival of Hawaiian pedagogies like Kaulana Mahina. Malia, welcome. You may come to this podium if you want, or you're welcome to sit there if you're more comfortable. Okay, I'll bring up the picture you had. It's already up. Sorry. Go ahead, Malia. Thank you.
Ke auine kala, velo, velo. Ke auine kala, Velo, velo, ke mo lehu lehu maine. Na kolo, ke mo lehu lehu maine. Na kolo, ma alihilani. Emoy, emoy. Maalihilani, emoy, emoy, awe anu nai o umaukupuna. Aloha. I share that mele that talks about the setting of the sun. From my panana or my viewpoint on the island of Kauai in the Konomoku in Hanapepe at Pu'olo Point, we witnessed the most beautiful sunsets that you can find. The sun tells us so much. The setting of the sun, the rising of the sun, our moons, our weather patterns. And that has been a big part of my own personal professional development in these last maybe 20 years or so. And earlier today, I know one of the panelists is still here, was on the women's panel from participating at COPs. And I remember participating at many of these COP meetings. And I would hear the leo of our wahine from different parts of the world talking about these solutions and how indigenous peoples have these solutions. And I really had to sit there and reflect a lot. Now, this was my last COP at the UNFCCC meetings was COP 15. So that was quite a while ago because they talked about COP 27. And I really had to think about what is it that my kupuna have taught me, my elders, that we have a solution here at home, that we can work on, that we can build our community together. And as salt makers, we were seeing, we were experiencing the effects, the impacts of climate change on our cultural practice. And we needed to find these solutions. We needed to work, to turn our hands down and to build these relationships. So I'm going to turn to a story that I submitted as a part of a book called Detours, a Decolonial Guide to Hawaii. And I'm looking at my sister here that was sharing on the last panel, and she said this was her first time to Hawaii. Go find this book, Detours, a Decolonial Guide to Hawaii. But I'm just going to give you a glimpse into a few of what I wrote in this letter to my baby. And this will give you a little bit of my, how I explain sea level rise and what we were experiencing as salt makers. In my lifetime, ka'ai hello, our family has not been able to make pa'akai for 5 consecutive years. 2015 was one of those years. On the Hoku moon, one of the full moon phases in the month of Ka'aona, traditional name of a month around June, July, the ocean tide was high. The waves crashed over the sand dunes. The ocean water flowed over into the salt making area. It flooded the area. I had never seen this before. Tutu, or grandma, said she never saw this before. We are asking the community to stop driving on the sand because this is causing the sand dunes to get lower and lower. And the only way to mitigate this and to protect the salt-making area from additional flooding is to not drive on the sand. It's easy enough to park in the parking lot and to walk for 2 minutes and enjoy the beach area with your family. Besides the overwash of the ocean, we are also experiencing an increase of rain during the summer months. And the puna, or our wells, are also rising higher than usual. All of this adds to the flooding of the area. And we were always taught by Tutu Nui that when the area is flooded, that we don't enter in and we wait till it's dry. Oh, hello. Climate change for some is an issue of life or death. It's having an impact on our human rights, our cultural rights, our rights as indigenous peoples, as Kanaka Maoli. Ka'ai o hello, e ho'opili mai, repeat after me. Ai malama. Ai malama is a collective movement of Pacific practitioners to revitalize lunar calendar knowledge. It's a solution, it's a tool, it's a methodology that teaches us to be better observers, kilo, to be active observers, kilo, to be environmental forecasters, or kilo, in our kayaulu, our community. You have to go read the rest in the book. But that's a glimpse of what we were experiencing. And I chose to share this photo from this summer. So obviously we weren't flooded and our family was able to produce salt again. Not as much as we were able to produce back in maybe 2005 or even earlier. But we mahalo, we definitely have gratitude that for the last few years, we were able to go back in, to harvest, to share with our community, to exchange with others. And most recently, which is why I think I was asked to be on the panel, we were able to partner with a number of scientists, hydrologists, here at UH Manoa to look at what's causing this flooding. And some preliminary results as we finish up our report, which we'll be able to share with the community very soon. It's funny because a lot of what the community was already sharing got confirmed by what a lot of the hydrologists and all the 2, 3, 4 years of testing and water level sensors and being out in the field and pulling all these wires and doing this and doing that. And I had to learn all these new vocab, which I loved. It came back to say, you know what your grandpa said about there's a salt shelf over here? That's what this confirmed. You know what you said about, Grandpa said about the clay in the area and why the water doesn't go down and why during the winter, after so much rain, the water stays there and then we let the environment and the weather tell us what's happening. Pololei oi, you're correct. I was like, mahalo. Now what? Now what are we going to do? And I share that because we learned a lot and I played multiple roles in our project of being a liaison to the community, to our Hui Hana Pa'akai, our 22 families, and I recognize one of our families also being here, and also aloha to the County of Kauai, Ohana that is here, because it was a lot of those partnerships that was able to help us stop the driving, continue driving onto the sand. And we've been, as a part of a kilo, and I say as a kilo scientist, as a community observer, that not just putting up the boulders and allowing the sand to naturally restore itself is where the most magic has happened. Now we see the mea kanu, the mea ola coming back through the sand. And I know that there's more for us to do, but to continue to partner and to believe and to know that that kahua and foundation that I called when I did that opening chant and oli of the kaohis and the kaleohanos and every kupuna from those families come with me and sit with me. When I sit with other scientists, it's not my voice that's coming out. It's really the voice of all of them because I hear them every day. And I get emotional about this because it's not an easy role to play as a facilitator of people, community, and to play these multiple roles. But I awam kuleana, and I know my parents, grandparents, and all of the ohana have continued to push me forward and guide me. And I'll stop there. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Malia. Okay, I want to do one question with the panel, and I want to certainly leave some time for the audience to ask some questions too. And Malia, if you're all right, I'd like to start with you with this first question, and then we can kind of just go down the line, just keep you talking if you're okay. If you need a moment, that'd be okay. Can we get you water or anything also? You sure? Okay, all right. I'd like to know from your perspectives, how do you feel government and our science university partners can work more effectively with our community on the topic of sea level rise adaptation in particular? Just want to get your perspective on that, if you can, please, a little more. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think we had so many great I guess, tips around that have already been shared. I really mahalo and support a lot of what has already been shared on our past panels yesterday, today. And I think through my own most recent experience of being a co-PI on this last research project and being able to work with government agencies, we've heard a lot about trust and building the trust and building the relationships. And that's very important. Always creating space and inviting different community leaders to sit with equal footing, whether you have a PhD or not, and recognize that they do come with that background. They come with the voices and the backing of their community is equally important to the work that's being done. I know many of them will say, well, we don't want to be in the 10 meetings. I don't have time. I want to be in the lo'i. I want to be there, but I cannot be in every single meeting. And so for me, I don't like being on all those meetings either. But we get invited, you know, like I see the planning commission gang here. And I get invited and I show up and I find the time and I have to explain to my family why I show up. And it's just as important as me being at the Lo'ipa'akai making salt. There's gonna be times when I gotta show up at the meetings. I have to work with the Hawaiian Civic Clubs to bring our stories and be creative in finding the solutions, writing the policies, working with our legislators and moving it forward. And there will be those that we need to work with, the young ones, to teach them the importance of having that balance of being in the field, but also and being culturally grounded, but also showing up and sitting in the Zoom meetings or, you know, being able to write that legislation that you believe in or that you support. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Michael. I wonder if we could shift to you to get
Yeah.
your perspective from your office. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I just want to riff off what Malia said, because the meetings are exhausting, maybe past tense. And we have so many of them. And I think U2 meetings metastasized under COVID. One of the things we're working on within our office is to get out in the community more and to listen to what the community ideas are. One such place, Waimanalo on Oahu, has serious issues with erosion at the beach park. And there are two approaches. We're going to win, but one approach is to have presentations and invite Sea Grant in, and we'll invite the community to our meeting and tell them what we think our solution is. What we're advocating for, and I'm gonna point Amy out and back, is to start by going out and sitting around the picnic table with the aunties and uncles and hearing what they want us to do. So for those of you who work in the community, it's okay to tell government workers that we need to come to you. So that's what I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Jared, I'm interested to hear, you know, how you're working with community in Hanu Mokuakea and you know, what's working for you and how you think you can improve and better, you know, in that environment. Thank you.
Yeah, so Papahānaumokuakea is co-managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service, the NOAA, the state of Hawaii, and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And so most management actions that we do by definition are kind of collaborative, and we have a cultural working group which advises us from the cultural perspective about, you know, the actions we're proposing to take on biological and on cultural resources. And then we have, you know, the agency and professional staff who are able to make recommendations. I think that gets us so far, but I think another part of your question was how do, you know, the UH and the other researchers kind of help us to do that. And I think I think I've noticed in the past decade that that's really become a focus both of UH and of USGS, and that's important because we need certain questions answered, and so they may not be the same questions that have a research interest or something like that to somebody, but having, you know, collecting that information from our partners and our co-managers, and then being able to go to the researchers and say, you know, this is what we need help with, is the most productive form of research that we receive, because then we receive an analysis or a tool that then we're able to use to make decisions. And that's what's most important. It's more than just saying, you know, sea level is going to rise or something like that. It's going the next step and thinking about, you know, what are what are some adaptation strategies then? How can you, how might we be able to mitigate that, or how might we be able to help the island or the species adapt? Things like that.
Thank you, Jared.
Yep.
Matt, your office does a ton of outreach, including around coastal hazards and sea level rise. What's working for you, and what do you think you hope to do better on?
I mean, appreciate the passing acknowledgement. We wish we could do more, quite frankly. And I think that actually being out on the ground in the field is, if you're going to have so many meetings, you might as well be outside doing. Because the experiential is just, there's nothing that can help you understand something than being there for yourself, but then also for those that are probably there, 363 days out of the year, kind of a thing. And we don't have here's almost half the team, right, is in this room. So, when we want to go out and force, we have to commit, and we know that it's going to be a time obligation, but we also know that council members want to learn, and we also know that we don't understand all of the situations out in the field, and that's probably the biggest, most important thing, is to not go in with here's information, but even just like, what questions are there? Scientists hopefully have an interest in extending their information. We are constantly training new team members, constantly training or educating new council members. I come from, my parents were educators. My mom taught first and kindergarten, and June was always a high note, but man, that first week of school when these kids don't know a damn thing, that can be draining and tiring because we feel like we're saying the same thing. So it's like, how have we, I thought I've already connected this bit of information with the person that needs to know to empower and support community. So just having our own patience and that acknowledgement that saying the same things over and over is still right, because we're probably going to refine how we talk about messages. We're going to learn things that we haven't known before. And the observational is really, really key and important, and not the question that you asked here, but I reflect on, the periods of time that we've collectively as a state experienced these high water level events were some of the most fun times as a Sea Grant extension agent for myself, just because it made things that we already knew quite generally about, the moon and the alignment with sun draws higher water levels, and that's just how tides come and go. It brought it into parlance and like colloquial discussions, even if it made the scientists uncomfortable that we put an S at the end of king tide, because king tide really is, there's one highest tide. And then we started talking about seasons of high tides, and like, oh God, what are you talking about? Like this getting over precision and accuracy was really a fun thing to do, because at the end of the day, more people just understood more about the environment, and they were able to go out there and experience it and document it themselves. So we're going to have way more meetings, so we might as well do them outside.
Great. Thank you all for your perspectives on that. We don't have a ton of time left, believe it or not. It's been a great discussion so far. I do want to take some time for one audience question. Okay, let's do one online. We haven't done one yet, so yeah. That's
okay.
Thanks.
So it says that there have been a couple of panelists and speakers that have mentioned the importance of community outreach in climate adaptation. How can organizations like PI-CASC, or I guess others who are providing grants or managing grants, restructure their grants so that compensation for community member participation in meetings is allowed?
On the government side, it's really hard, but we're pleased to say that we worked with a community-based organization for them to get a grant, which we then partnered with, and they were much more nimble and ready and able to provide compensation for people that came out in a half dozen Saturday workshops, where it was both workshop and then HANA to give back to the community. So government can be a good partner for a lot of things. Financing and funding is maybe not the best thing that we can partner with. So understanding that is hopefully an open door to thinking through how to be creative for engagement.
Thanks, Matt. Michael?
Yeah, can I ask, was it Was the question grant specific or I didn't recognize what PI-CASC was.
I think specifically around compensating community members for participating in these projects, participating in meetings.
Oh, yeah, so I don't have an answer to that.
I think what kind of along the lines, the same lines, and I've heard this internationally as well, is many of our Indigenous colleagues would always be advocating for direct funding and not having to go through all the hoops, jumping through all of those. I mean, and having the different percentages taken off for here and there and everywhere. And then also, I think when there are those kinds of funding and projects that happen, to make sure that there are line items that go directly to the community. You know, there are times when just to, when in certain projects where we've had researchers come in and they can provide their budget request. And then when the community comes in, there's all these limitations. And so I guess being creative with the funding and finding ways to pay them for their time, to support the basic infrastructures that they need, because when we are out in the field and doing the research, there's a need for the tents and the food and the gas to go here and there. And many times they're just willing to bring that into the space and to contribute. But everybody else got travel per diems and this and that. And even though they're coming from 5 miles away, how do we support them? And how do we get that direct funding to our community groups so that they also, not that money makes you feel valued, but just as a mahalo for the time that, and they probably had to take off from work to come and be available that day. So kind of along those same lines, I would call that direct funding to the community.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's move to, unless you had anything urgent you wanted to add, Jared or Michael, I suggest we move on to audience question or two. Do we have any? Okay, go ahead. Okay.
Guys all have pretty tough positions to be making that you have to make decisions about. You're all making decisions about how to adapt to the sea level changes that we've been discussing. And so kind of because we're nearing the end of the day, I was interested in maybe something optimistic about, you know, you're in this line of work, you're having to make all these decisions. There's all these people that are trying to help in ways that may be helpful or not. But, you know, what do you see that is good that is happening? What is like a positive that you see in the future for being able to adapt or deal with some of the scenarios that you're coming in and that you're seeing right now with the work that you're doing?
I'll start because I always have hope. And I used to always hear about like, how can you go to these climate change meetings? It's so depressing. I never really approached climate change feeling depressed, honestly, because I think as a Hawaiian, as a person, my kupuna would always teach us how to adapt. So we're always adapting to the changes. It may be quite extreme now, but we find ways to adapt. I don't know if salt making will still be here 20 years when we're having this discussion again. I don't, but I shared that picture of us making salt this year. because that gave me hope. Because for 7 consecutive years, like I said, we were making zero. We went from 55-gallon buckets of a harvest to 0 consecutively. So when we share, we used to share by a 5-gallon bucket. You ask, we give. You got a party, we give. Now you ask, I ask you, what is that for? How are you using it? Maybe I'll give you a quart-size bag or a gallon size. It really depends on how far it's gonna go and how much I have to share. But I think, you know, we get asked like, how do we, well, what can we do? And partnering with, and too bad they have to leave, but having a good enough relationship with the county that when we need to bring in boulders and block off the roadside, that they are there. They show up with the boulders, with the manpower, and they do it within a day or 2. That never used to happen. So that relationship and having that direct call has been a very successful strategy for us to keep that relationship there. And I think and finally, I think what also gives me hope is to see that the younger generation wants to be a part of learning and strengthening their cultural foundations, their cultural practices. And when we put the kahea or that call out, because we need to show up at that meeting, that they show up in force. And they show up to tell their story so that when they need to tell their story in 20 years, it'll be a story of holomua and of moving forward.
Mahalo. I think that's a great question. Can we continue with the rest of you three? I think it's a great way to end. I'm getting short on time, but I'd love to hear your perspective on what gives you
might
hope.
not be as inspiring. So one thing I noticed that's different from 10 or 15 years ago is 15 years ago, there was still a lot of magical thinking out there. Like maybe there won't be rising seas, maybe there won't be climate change. Maybe, you know, we can do a temporary fix and deal with it in 20 years. And I don't see that as much anymore. I think there's a much wider spread acknowledgement that we have issues that we need to make decisions now. And not hope that it goes away for the next generation. And that's, I mean, that's the biggest change. I can't minimize. Usually I end and everybody just wants to go have a drink. But it's going to be a hard battle, especially for issues I deal with coastal development. It's going to be a fight to resolve these issues. And I feel like more people on our side, assuming we're all on the same side.
I think, you know, like was just said, I think the difference between, you know, what gives me hope is that now, you know, not just a select few are talking about it, but everyone is talking about it. And companies, national, international companies are making changes. You know, car companies are saying we're going to be all in on electric vehicles, and you know, states are proposing, you know, renewable energy goals to be net zero by certain timeframes. On a smaller scale, on the things that we manage, the biological resources, you know, some of these crazy ideas that people had 10 years ago for how we might adapt to climate change are showing that they might actually work, you know, showing that they do work. And so, and those ideas continue to keep coming. And I think that's what gives me hope, is we have people who are thinking about how can we adapt to climate change, and that thought process continues, and there are people who are willing to implement that. And we are making, if small, we are making progress on helping to build resilience into the biological and cultural resources that we manage.
I think it's a convergence of crises, and it's actually accelerating addressing some environmental challenges or legacies from previous sort of wisdoms of knowledge, perhaps of the middle of last century, and how we approached community planning and development, and the confluence of like the climate change impacts and our collective resurgence of redressing social and environmental inequities and injustice is hopefully leapfrogging us into this better future. And if we can find more ways to incorporate it into our work, we're going to be doing all the better in addressing stuff that we knew we wanted to but didn't know how, while also preparing community for climate change impacts. And again, we say it, we don't know the answers, but if we're just talking about surviving and preparing for the worst, that is not very motivational at all. So we obviously have to talk about the successes that we are having along the way to keep the fuel in our tanks, the proverbial fuel, not the fossil fuel. But and lastly, like, more people are talking about it, right? So this office is quite young. Other departments are saying the same things that we were saying 3 years ago. They're waving around plans, strategies, mayor's directives. Our budget office annually is asking me for insights for something they submit to a rating agency. They recently said, can you update this slide? I gave them 4. So like there is momentum in the system, and government, if you can pivot it, it will start going, and it'll be hard to change its success, right? Like, we're trying to pivot it from inertia or some legacy of rules and regulations. And once we start to turn it, it's going to keep us moving forward in a positive direction.
Great. Thank you all for that. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We could continue this discussion. I wish we could, but we've run short on time. I want to thank you all. I want audience, let's give them a big round of applause for sharing with us. I'd like to invite Heather and Mary Vaughn up to the stage, and we're going to close out the second day of our Science Summit. Okay, is this on? Yeah, good. All right. I just wanted to share one concluding thought, and I invite Heather and Mary Vaughn to do the same thing. This event was, these 2 afternoons were billed as a science summit. We did intentionally work in a lot about the human aspects, the cultural aspects, the societal aspects, but I'm just really struck by how that theme just resonated through all this, and I'm taking away that science is never at the center of this. I do feel really confident, that we continue to play a vital role in this, but we're just one input to these really difficult challenges we're dealing with, and it is all our communities and human beings at the center of this. So I want to thank you all for helping me kind of strengthen that perspective, bring that back to me. Appreciate that. I do have a bunch of thank yous I want to do, but Heather, Mary Vaughn, do you have any thoughts you want to share, concluding thoughts or anything?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to have a concluding thought as part of the PI-CASC leadership, but really just a mahalo back. Thank you for that beautiful Oli and song. And I don't really have much more to wrap up except that, there's a lot of logistics, I guess we could say, but I really just appreciate everybody still being here that's here online and in person, and everybody that put effort into the workshop, Brad being the main engine behind all of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to be that guy. I do have something I did want to share. No, I just wanted to share. We have a project that wasn't discussed over the past couple of days. where they came to us with their annual report and they said, we've been failing. I said, what do you mean you've been failing? And they said, we've been talking to the community, we've been going to these community meetings, we've been engaging, and we just can't find a place to do the research that we thought we could find. And I said, are you still talking to the community? And they said, well, yes. I said, then you're not failing. This is what these projects are meant to do. We're meant to engage, right? We're meant to build those relationships. And then beyond that, let's not think of this as a project-oriented relationship. If you think about the things that we looked at over the past 2 days, they've been thematic. They've been ideas, they've been stories, they've been things that are bigger than we are. They're bigger than projects. So when we engage with each other, when we build these relationships, let's build them beyond the 2-year grant cycle. Let's build them beyond what's going to happen in the next 6 months, because the challenges that we're facing are things that are decadal. They're things that are generational. And the solutions that we can bring to the table similarly are things that we bring from our lifetime. And as you've heard today, from the lifetimes of those before us. So those are the things that I came away from here, is that we are the they, right? We, all of us, you are not the scientist in the room. You are not the indigenous person in the room. We are the they who has to come up with how we address these challenges. And I thank you all for contributing to this. And I'm going to let you do the formal thank yous, but I just wanted to say thank you. A big mahalo to you all.
Before we part this evening, I just wanted to put another plug in for the last event of Hawaii Climate Week. Tomorrow is the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum at 8 a.m. In the Campus Center ballroom just across campus from here. So please join that if you can. I want to give a big mahalo to our team that put together this Science Summit. Maya Walton, Beth Lenz, Rachel Lentz, Katie Henson, and Lisa and Kristen in our office. It took a lot of work to put this together, and I really appreciate it. It was all hands on deck. And Patrick Grady, sorry, Patrick. I knew I was going to forget somebody there. Like I said, it was all hands on deck. Everybody's here, so I knew I was going to forget something. But thank you. And I want to thank our Alaska partners for making the trip to Hawaii. It's a long way to come, and we really benefited from you being here. I want to, of course, thank all of our speakers, panelists, and research presenters. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you all, our audience, for being here for these great 2 afternoons. Oh, and I want to thank our partners from the National Climate Adaptation Science Centers for being here as well, for making the trip, many of them all the way from Virginia and DC in the Midwest. So thank you very much for being here. So with that, I think that ends us for the evening, and hope you can make it to the final event tomorrow. Thank you.